We're good.
All right. Good afternoon. I would like to call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Oldham County Board of Education to order. It is December 14th, 2020, and we are at the Arvin Education Center. First item of business is to approve the agenda. Any corrections or additions, Superintendent?
No, ma'am, the agenda is good to go.
All right, motion to approve the agenda, please. Made by everybody. Made by Mr. Dodson, seconded by Mrs. Hundley. All those in favor? 5-0. Excellent. Mr. Bohannon, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, sir? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's go immediately to our instructional session, Superintendent.
So we've been light on these due to the COVID situation, but we're going to be a little bit heavier tonight. But we've got two great presentations, the CDIP from Dr. Smith and assessment scores update from Leslie McKinney and Alec, oh my gosh, Johnson. Wow, that just went right through my head. So we'll get started, and I think Dr. Smith is going to start us.
Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Hello, how are you all doing? On your table, you have the slide version that we'll be projecting on the screen. Some of the numbers are a little small, so if you'd like to look at this, you can write on this or ask questions about it. We have, as an SLD, so a Student Learning Division, spend a good deal of time looking over the goals that we set in the past and understanding the needs of our school district. One thing that as a team we looked at and thought carefully about were, because our work was interrupted mid-year last year, did it make sense to throw out everything we had been working towards or to continue moving forward thinking instead of a single year but as a 2-year arc of work? And so as a team, what we came up with was to make some clarifications to our projects and our activities, the strategies that we're using here, but to try and keep our goals from 2019 to 2021 consistent. We thought that made a lot of sense, even though there was an interruption in our formal in-person schooling. And so what I'll show you in the next couple of slides are the goals that we set and the strategies that we're going to follow to try and reach those goals. So as you see up behind me, we have 6 required goals, which start with proficiency and go through to graduation rate. And then we chose to add one additional goal this year, which was about distant and remote learning. And we did that because it's right in front of us and it's something that we feel we should be putting our time and attention into. Now, the first goal that we set that you see up here is around proficiency related to reading and mathematics. In reading in the spring of 19, we had a 66.6% proficiency in reading at the elementary level, a 73.6% proficiency at middle, and we set goals of 70 and 78% that we want to reach by 2024. In math, we were at 61.6 for elementary and 65.4, and we set goals of 67% and 70% to reach those by the spring of 2024. To get to those goals, we have 3 initiatives or strategies we want to implement. And our first is looking at a system to gather academic data and make it available to school teams. One of the things that we have noticed as an SLD is that principals and school leadership teams spend a good deal of time compiling information, and we want to give them the information that they can look at and take action on. Now, we have some tools that we find that are very, very effective in place right now. We get data books that are shared with school leadership teams. We have pushed on teachers and principals to unpack map data and make sense of it. But we have a couple other dashboards and other things that we're preparing to roll out in the new year that will help schools look at academic trends and be able to take action on them down to the classroom level. Next, we want to make sure that we're being really intentional with our curricular resources. One thing that we have noted, especially this year, and we'll talk a little bit more, is around mathematics. We know that math is an area as a school system that we can focus our attention, and specifically looking at kindergarten to 8th grade, the K-8 math trajectory. We've brought some teams of elementary leaders and teachers together, instructional coaches, to look at our math curriculum. and we have a couple different options that are laid out before us. We're gathering those curricular resources, we're looking at them, and then school SBDMs will make decisions about the curriculum that they'll teach in their building. And then finally, our last strategy is around data analysis, and we're focusing specifically on how we monitor progress and give feedback to students who already reach academic standards. So not just kids that are struggling, but if you've met the standard, how do we push that work further so that you continue to grow beyond just proficiency and reach the level that we would call distinguished. Okay, if we go on to the top of the next page, just as a checkpoint, I wanted to show you the fall of 19 and 20 MAP data. So all of our students in elementary school, middle school, took the MAP assessment. I'm showing you the 3rd to 5th grade elementary data and the 6th to 8th grade data. The fall of 2019, we had 62% of students that fell into the proficient range taking the MAP assessment and 68.6 at middle school in reading. We saw some small gains in both of those areas for reading in the fall of this year. In 19, we were at 61.7 for elementary and 63.9 for math, but we saw declines in both of those areas from the fall of 2019 to the fall of 2020. And this trend that we see in MAP, you'll see it roll out in a couple other places, but we saw clear declines in both of those places. If we look at science and writing data, starting with writing right here, you can see the same numbers that we saw in 2019. We were at about 60% in elementary school in proficiency in writing. Middle school has had some struggles. We were in the 39% for middle school and then back up to 63 in high school. And we set some fairly ambitious goals, especially for middle school, to grow more than 10 points to 2024. And then in science, as you can see here, we also see, again, a dip in middle school, and we've set some goals here for 2024. Now, our strategies for these are focused on curriculum. For us, when we did a review of how we were teaching our science curriculum, one of the things we knew that we needed to focus on was alignment to standards. Some of the scope and sequence that we had organized in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade taught the materials logically, but didn't always line up to the way the test was organized by the state. So our numbers were artificially low, in my opinion. So we're looking at how we vertically align 6th to 7th to 8th grade data for science, or the curriculum for science, so that it is a tighter alignment to the way the test is organized by the state. We also want to make sure that as we deliver assessments, we are unpacking the data that we get from them and making that data available to teachers. That's back to the system that we're using to share the data to class at the classroom level. And then the final item was around aligning those to the next generation science standards. There's been some movement in science standards, and we want to make sure that we're properly aligned and we're getting our students ready for those assessments. I want to pause right here on goals 1 and 2. Did you have any questions on those before we move to percentile ranks and trends across all elementary and middle schools?
Questions?
Sure,
Mr.
yeah.
Woosley.
Dr. Smith, when were the goals set for the plan?
The initial goals were set, we started in 2019. The initial goals were set in the 18-19 school year. We revisited them, and especially given the MAP data that we saw, we decided to hold them and extend them by 1 year.
I wanted to make sure that you had revisited them since the MAP came out.
Yes, and we have. We have indeed. Yep.
Why do you think the dip is so high from elementary to middle in writing? I know you talked about science.
So I can speak about that from my experience in middle school. So for the last 2 years at North Oldham Middle School, we had looked at our writing data, and for us, our strategy was to revisit who is a writing teacher at the middle school level. So sometimes there's a mentality that language arts teachers teach writing. What we did at North Oldham Middle School was to take every content teacher, with the exception of math, and to have them ask the question, how do I teach writing in my classroom? So if I'm a science teacher, I may not immediately go and say, oh, I'm a writing teacher too. You do a lab in my science class, you write a summary, and we had content teams come together and say, the level of writing I actually have kids doing is a lot of lab summaries, let's say, for science. And so we got them to rethink how they teach writing in the content area. In elementary school, I think it's a little more discrete. And I think when you get back to when you get to high school, you've gotten through middle school, which is its own experience for a lot of kids. I think writing shifts a little bit as you become more mature. So we were working on, at North Oldham Middle School, how do we get every teacher to think of themselves as a writing teacher also? And so it was the type of writing that they worked on. I don't know, or I couldn't, from my vantage point right now, I can't say that every school approaches it that way. We had set a goal to grow, in approximately the 10-point range for writing. And what we saw happen with a whole initiative we called Project Write was a 3-point growth at our school, but an 18-point drop across the state. So we saw all of our schools decline. North Oldham Middle School grew a small amount and beat the state average. And so one of the things we're hoping to do in this initiative and to take what we learned from Project Write is to spread those best practices across our schools. Something that I have shared with our level directors and also with SLD was when we had that growth in our scores, we didn't necessarily have the other schools come and learn from us. Instead, it was more like, oh, that's great, good job, you guys did a good job, and I'm gonna go back to what I was doing. And so what we're looking for is what you would call cross-pollinating. So like, here's how we approached it, and we got some traction. Here was our process, and I made sure that as that unfolded, we documented how we organized ourselves so that instructional coaches at other schools could recreate that same experience. Did I answer your question?
Yes, and my other question was on the writing for K-Prep, is it strictly written responses on essays, or is also a portion of that punctuation, grammar, that kind of?
It's the rubrics incorporate a lot of different things. So
Okay.
it's not just exclusively making an argument, say. What we did and what I found valuable at the building level was to have the students complete 2 mock writing exams in the same way that you would on the test. We had found it also difficult that students usually take the writing assessment as the last item on the 4th or 5th day of testing. So they finished all the other ones, and then you get to write 2 essays, which is an exciting opportunity to show what you've learned, and not always the thing that everyone wants to do. But what we did was, with the help of our math department and all the teachers on the campus, to break the students into groups. We used the rubrics that we got from the state. We developed a common writing prompt, and we had every teacher grade and score essays. And that also helped them say, oh, this is what a level 4 is, a level 3 is, a level 2 is. And if I haven't ever had to do that before, then I wouldn't know what to be looking for. And then we had them come together in content teams to actually talk about what they saw and what they learned and how this applied to their content area, which again was a push that they hadn't necessarily seen or done in the past. So we were just trying to shift the whole culture of writing on the campus. It's a little harder right now remotely to do this, and that's always like an asterisk that you kind of put there, but it's not an excuse. We still need to be teaching writing, and our work right now around the instructional core is having us really focus on what kids have to do, what's actually in front of them. But it's something that we're committed to and something we're working on.
This is reminiscent of our discussions last winter with site-based councils.
Yes.
And that whole concept of cross-pollinating
Yes.
is what we have been driving at for the last 10 years. If you are doing something well in one school, please share it. So we hope that your leadership in this role will be instrumental in that regard, Dr. Smith. Thank you. Mr. Dodson.
Yeah.
On the grading of this, the people out in the state that grades this, and it's all subjective on what you read.
Yep.
And we may have a stricter standard, and they may have another standard they're looking at because it's subjective, even though they have rubrics and all this. And I'm just wondering, can that all be brought closer together? Because I may read this and think of it one way.
Yep.
Kevin may read it and think of it another way.
That's a really important point. What you're describing is what we call rater reliability. And so before we had any of the teachers score any essays, we gave them all an exemplar and showed them what a level 4, 3, 2, 1 was. And then they read an essay together with our instructional coach and then went through the rubric and said, did you notice these parts? Now, a 2-hour training like that doesn't make you a state level scorer, and doing that kind of work when you have 100 essays in front of you and you've read the rubric and you're moving through them quickly and efficiently. It's not identical, but it helps to make your number 3 and your number 3 similar. And so what we tried to do was to anticipate the problem of what Superintendent Schultz thinks is a 3 and what I think is a 3, so that we're close according to the rubric. And that's the same kind of process. One of my colleagues at South Oldham Middle School did a live scoring activity, which is another interesting way to attack writing, where as the students wrote, they got immediate feedback. They didn't write an essay and turn it in and then find out later. They had a whole bunch of people from the district office and their leadership team and teachers score and then give you feedback in the moment and have you go back and make those changes, so that at the student level, they're reading and making sense of the feedback on the quality of the essay. That's another approach. And so I think, one of the ways that I think of this is you look at what schools are doing well and you take what you can from them, and then you try and build momentum. That's what I think works.
Thank you.
All right.
Now, just before you go, I'd just
please.
like to add one thing. So several years ago, and I'll use Lisa Peters as a prime example. Lisa was a very good principal for us for years. And about a year and a half ago, we started talking about writing again because our scores are slipping. And we basically said, how often are we giving kids a chance to actually practice like they play? And Leslie worked on that project with several other principals and SLD and stuff like that. And what we found is that we just got away from some good practices. It's like you were experiencing some success, so you go on, you move on to something else. And we revisited it. And when we had that conversation with Lisa, she just goes, Greg, we know all this, we just stopped doing it. And so part of it is when you have success, as we've had in the past, to continue to do what got you there in the first place, and then refine and add and tweak what you need to do. So it's going in the right direction, or we headed in the right direction. We don't have any scores to talk about this last year because of COVID, but the process is in place to ensure, as Dylan says, that it's cross-pollinating and we learn some wins and we keep those things consistently going.
Yep. All right, if we take a look at goal number 3, this is where we're talking about percentile ranks. So we're trying to increase the conditional growth percentiles for all schools in reading and math. When we're thinking of the percentile rank, you imagine 100 people in a line. If you're in the first percentile rank, there are 99 people that are better than you. If you're in the 99th, there are 98 people standing behind you in line. Now, what Leslie and I did, was to look at these data as grade levels. So if we looked at all the growth that kids made from kindergarten to first grade, where did they fall in that line? And from first grade to second, and second to third, and onward. Now, what you end up seeing when you look on here, if you go to this chart right here, is that kindergarten to first grade in reading was almost average. They were at 44. But if you look at the growth in reading from first to second grade, they were in the first percentile rank. Now, what MAP does is they take the students in a given school and compare them to other schools like that one. So a Harmony Elementary School's first grade is compared to other schools and other kids that are like Harmony, the same demographic, the same performance level in the past. And you can see we're sort of in the reading area in the 40s, 30s, 40s. Our goal is for all K growth from kindergarten to first, all the way from 8th to 9th, to be at the 50th percentile rank. 50th means you're making adequate average growth. You're right in the middle of the bell curve. But if you take a look at math, you can see there's a lot more work to be done. And this is based on our MAP data from 2019 to 20, and you saw those declines on the previous page. In our first to second grade, we were in the second percentile rank. Second to third, third to fourth, fourth to fifth, fifth to sixth was all in the first. What that would mean is if you took those grade levels and you lined them all up, we would be last in line compared to all the others. Now, to me, this is a call to action. This is an opportunity for us to more urgently work on math, which is why we have brought instructional coaches and other groups together, teachers. We're looking at math curriculum, and we're thinking very carefully about 3 things. How do we adopt a curriculum, train and support teachers, and make sure that it's rigorous enough that we start to improve what we see happening here across our schools? And so this is just from this 1 year of growth, from the fall of 2019 to the fall of this year. Here's where we see those scores unfold. Any questions on this before we move forward?
Thank
All
you.
right, it's a place for us to work. All right, if we take a look, for goal number 3. So when I was talking about the dashboards and making data available, what we really want to do is to unpack the data so it's not just a grade level trend, but you can talk about kids at the student level in each class. And so what we're doing is we're looking at ways to take these scores and attach them to the rosters of every teacher. So a teacher can look at all the kids in their class and know how they've performed, not just look at trends across a whole grade. All right? Okay, for goal number 4, we're looking at students with disabilities. And so what we have here is you can see our reading scores for the spring of 2019 and our goal set to the spring of 2024. We have it for elementary, middle, and high school. We've had about a third of our students perform at the proficient level, and our goal is to grow that to approximately 50% over the next 5 years. And then in mathematics, it's closer to a fifth of our students performing at the proficient level, and we're growing that to about 40%, depending on the level, between 40 and 45%. Now for us, we've taken on an initiative that we are calling co-teaching. This is where you have a certified special education teacher as well as a general ed teacher in the same room, so that we're not pulling kids out of accessing the core curriculum, but instead we're bringing specially designed instruction into the co-teaching space. That has been going on for a little while, but we feel like there's an opportunity here to continue to train, support, and coach and push that work in Tier 1, that this is an opportunity for us to get better in core instruction. And then the other piece of this, on the flip side of that, is when we've assessed students, making sure that we can access and unpack the assessment data, and not use just map data, for example, but look at summative data, diagnostic data, and other items like that. Okay, if we go to goal number 5, we're looking at our transition readiness. So transition readiness, you have a couple of different ways to think about that. Students that are college bound, that are career bound, or both. And so for us, we have an opportunity, especially when you look at this chart, for students supported in special education. We had in 2019 about 20% of students that either sat and took the ACT, an AP course, one of those kind of college-bound courses, or completed an assessment for an apprenticeship or a career pathway. And so I think that we have an opportunity here for when a student chooses a career pathway to keep them on that pathway and not have them jump from one pathway 1 year to another, so they are able at the end of 4 years to sit for a test or a certificate and be able to earn that certificate. So we're setting this goal to go from 19% to 25% by the end of this year, and you can see based on a couple of subgroups how we want to break those data out. And then for us, the strategy is just around meaningful, rigorous academic curriculum, and then also having them make sure that they have access to those courses. And then goal number 6 is related to our graduation rate. Our overall graduation rate was 96.1 in 2019. It rose to 97% in 2020. And you can see, depending on the subgroup, how quickly those different, the rates grew or changed. So like with African American students, it went from almost 10% higher, from 86% to 96% in 2020. We've set a goal by 2023 for 100% of students to graduate in 4 years. So you can see those rates. And then for us, our strategies are around equitable access to our curriculum, and also to have measuring the effectiveness of our programming. And then our final goal, goal number 7, is around communication and distance learning. So we have this whole subgroup of students now that are 100% online. One of our strategies to support them has been developing a team of advisors that helps those students navigate our virtual learning academy. We feel like that group has been really, really successful in getting our 1,500 students in VLA through the first trimester successfully. We had about 400 students leave and 90 students join in the second trimester. So we're at a little over 1,150 approximately at secondary. So we feel like those advisors and continuing to build that learning community and to keep them networked together is very helpful. We've also, as part of this broad goal, brought in an AP at every secondary school as the administrative lead for the kids in VLA, so that if parents have questions, they don't have to call the district office, they can call their home school and talk to an administrator. We've attached those advisors back to their home school so they feel like they're part of their school community. And we feel like that's helping to help the schools keep ownership of their students so that they feel like it's our Oldham County High School students in a virtual space, not in a virtual school someplace else. And then we have also developed a number of resources that we have shared with other counties that have asked for guidance and support, but also we've developed some really good internal resources around communicating with parents, with students, and helping to kind of build out this program. Okay, any questions on those goals?
No questions.
All right, very good.
Thank you, Dr.
One other
Smith.
question that Superintendent Schultz had asked about was our failure rate for trimester one. I know that that is a question that's come up. I looked at all 6th to 12th grade students and saw grades unfold like this by subject area. Now, I know that there's a difference between middle school kids and their success online and high school students. And so I can disaggregate this further if you would like to know by school or by grade level. Broadly speaking, in secondary, you can see that roughly half of students earn an A in each of the subject areas. Related arts is a little bit higher, and a smaller percentage of kids are failing their classes by subject. But I can take this data, which I looked at for all 612, and then break it down for you if you'd like to know just high school or by school.
Is this district-wide VLA and in person?
This is all of the grade data that's currently in Infinite Campus.
Okay.
So yes, this is the whole system. All right, I'm going to pause right here, and we're going to transition over, and Leslie's going to jump in, and she's going to talk about a couple of other documents. Do you want to use that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Hello, and happy holidays, because I'm pretty sure I won't see you again before then.
Happy
It's great to see you.
holidays.
I want to hand out an additional document to go along with what Dr. Smith shared with you. He shared the CDIP with you. That's one component of the larger comprehensive improvement planning that districts, thank you, are required to do each year. And so we want to provide you the whole report. What he shared with you is behind the first half. But there are other pieces that were required, like needs assessments, executive summaries, achievement gap, professional development, other components that kind of fed into the decisions that the SLB department made when they were making the actual CDIP. So we just want you to have that. There's some of those things you've actually seen, and I actually put a sticky note on them if it's something you saw at a previous board meeting. But for the most part, we just wanted you to have that information. So what we're going to be sharing right now is what data is available from the 1920 school year. Seems pretty late to be having that conversation. This data did roll out the end of October. However, because it was so limited, we had to wait for some other things to fall in place. Some other fall testing had to occur, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we're getting this to you just a little bit later than we typically would, and it's going to be a lot shorter because we have most of our components are not going to be valid since we weren't able to assess those students in the spring. So I want to share this with you. And you had, I think Ms. Easton sent you these.
Thank you.
Virtually, but we also wanted to make sure that you had a printed copy. Some of us like to write on them. So I want to share that with you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to stand sort of to the side, and we'll sort of go through this, stopping for questions.
Can I ask you a question?
Leslie,
Yeah,
you'll have to pick up on the mic.
Oh, I have to have it. Can I turn it?
And Ms. McKinney, Mr. Woosley has a question.
Before we get too farther, I'm still trying to process some of the information that Dr. Smith gave us.
Gotcha.
On that failure rate, have you guys compared the first semester of this year versus the first semester of last year?
No.
Okay. So I'm just kind of going over the numbers in my head, and if at 5.3% of English, that's about 350 kids have failed English from 6th through 12th. So to me, that's kind of shocking. But
Well, anecdotally, talking to all principals during their fall observations, that is one thing that they all have noticed, that they have more students that are struggling to get things in and are submitting things late. I mean, it's a product of being in remote learning for as long as we were at the beginning of the year and now back again. And that's been a source of frustration for pretty much everybody. I mean, because, and I'll use Mr. Watkins as an example. He had his automotive teacher that was out on maternity leave. He didn't have a baby, but his wife did, just for clarity. And he was basically making sure he was doing the parent contacts for him. And so he was contacting up to 40 kids every 2 weeks or so saying, you don't have these things in, and basically, what can I do to get you to turn these things in? that is not an unfamiliar narrative when I've talked with secondary school principals this fall as we've been talking about NTI and what's going to happen and so forth, so on. If you think back to last year, one of the biggest things that was an issue with NTI is that we did kind of a hold harmless grade thing because nobody was very much aware of what we were doing. That was never talked about this year. In fact, it was not because it was all new learning, and we'd gotten better and so forth, so on. But I think we still have a lot of kids that are struggling in a remote world to try to get everything in, and when their parents are working or otherwise preoccupied, it's tough. Teachers are doing a very good job. Eric Davis and Michael have been now doing home visits. It's just in a virtual world, it's very challenging to get some of these kids, I'll use the word motivated, but maybe just connected. So we're looking forward to when we can get back to in-person instruction so that we can help alleviate some of those concerns.
Is it a lot of data to pull that comparative from this year to last year?
So what Infinite Campus allows us to do, it allows us to pull in a range. So I can look and get the final grades, for example, that were submitted in a semester. We're at a trimester, which is a strange moment in the high school timeline because middle school kids, trimester ended, they're into new classes, they had a grade posted. Secondary, it's more like a progress, like where you are at this moment. But if you'd like, I can go and see, and it sounds like you might like to see it not just high school, but would you like to know school by school?
I
Or what
think
level
so,
of detail?
Dr. Smith, and I think this is going to be part of our site-based council
Yep.
discussions coming up very soon, because I really think it's important for us to look very carefully at where these pockets of concern are, and in my opinion, these pockets of concern are across the board. And it's thanks to the pandemic, but it's mostly thanks to the fact that we have not been allowed to have our kids in school in person.
Yeah, and I think there's also grades move, so it's always a moving target.
Yeah.
So even if I pulled last year's to this date today, they're going to be comparing apples and oranges, but it's at least a data point. So you
Right.
can look at it and you can say, all right, well, at this moment in time, it was this, and we'll see at the semester if that's a little bit more final, because especially at high school, final projects are in and everything is then, the cement kind of dries on your first half of the year. So that might be maybe semester one to semester one before site visits. That would
Yes, yes.
might be a good data point.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Smith.
And I'm sorry, I couldn't move off of that. That was.
That's
And
okay,
if I
Mr.
could- If I
Woosley.
could speak to that for just a second, I've had the
Please.
opportunity to work with the high schools, all three of them, really closely in the last 2 weeks as a part of their comprehensive school improvement plans. And all of them have identified this as one of their biggest priorities, as their failure rates. And so while we may not at the district level have run that, I can tell you they know their percentages, they know the rate that's higher than typical. So I think you can expect to hear some of that, and would be a very fair question that they would really be prepared for. Several of them, if not all, will be putting that in their improvement plan. What are some strategies they can use? We discussed things, and I think this is where it gets pertinent to what you're talking about is, let's say you jumped, and we had some schools who say that according to
that?
their data, they have jumped 200% in failure rates over what's typical for them. That's a huge increase.
That's,
One of the things I talk to them about is that a skill problem or a will problem? Have we isolated those students to say these 300 kids are failing, one, because they're simply not turning in work, as folks have alluded to, or because they're unable to prosper and access in either a hybrid model or virtually? And so what they're doing right now is working deeply to figure that out. Which kids is it a skill issue for? Which kids is it just I'm not getting with the flow of getting my work turned in? Maybe I'm a little lax, maybe I'm struggling with how that vehicle needs to look. So there's a lot of really deep conversation going on at those high schools right now about that. It is certainly probably their top priority. And so I think that will enhance also what you're able to get from Dr. Smith.
thank you, Ms. McKinney. I believe that must be very disconcerting
It
for
is.
our classroom teachers and our school principals.
Well, and step one is to identify what the reality is of those, again,
If you
why.
can determine that.
Yes, why are they failing? And
Yes.
that's probably step one, is to figure that out. So what we're going to be looking at today is you're going to notice K-Prep is not up there. So you're not going to see proficiency ratings, and you're not going to see elementary and middle school scores. You're going to basically see what we can report on with high school and also with our English language learners. And I'm going to turn it over to Alec when we get to that part, because he is the expert in that area. But I want to share with you the data we were able to extract, and by that I mean the state reported very little in the school report card. So you're probably not getting a lot of questions other than where's the data, because it simply doesn't exist. So a lot of this we had to sort of extract ourselves in order to figure out where we were with some of this data. We're going to really be talking a lot about where our issues are within that by school. And so again, we're going to probably have a little more in-depth of a conversation than we typically have, but it's still going to be quite a bit reduced just because we're mainly talking about high school. So we're going to jump right into ACT first. And I started with this first slide just as an informational slide. I'm not going to read it for you. But when we start to talk about the problems that we're having with specific subpopulations, it's often helpful to know how many kids we're talking about here. So what I put here for you were how many of these students in this reporting period fell into that subpopulation at the entire high school level, but also at specifically, for example, the 12th grade level. That's going to be really important to understand when we look at graduation rates, and they sometimes look really low, but we could be talking about 10 kids. So I just wanted you to have that to look back at, should you have some questions about relatively how these kids are doing compared to all. So if you're okay, I'm going to skip on to the next one, knowing you can always flip back to that. Okay, so we're going to start with ACT. And the first one we're going to look at is North Odom High School. And I can tell you, some of the things you're going to notice about North Odom High School is they grew or stayed the same in 3 out of 4 areas. They had a slight decline in English in terms of the percent of students making benchmark in English, slight decline, and even with that slight decline, they are still on, if the graph at the bottom will show you, they are still on an upward trend over time. So that minor bump has not taken away from the fact that they are going in the right direction. I do want to point out math, which is a huge increase that we see in the percentage of kids that are meeting benchmark. That's the most important ACT number for me, is not just what the average score is, but how many kids are actually meeting it, and we want to see that number go up every year. So real exciting news for North Odom High School in terms of their ACT. Now I want to talk about where these scores come from. ACT was given in Kentucky prior to the COVID situation and NTI. However, NTI did interfere with the makeup day, which means if the kids weren't there on that very first initial day where all kids were expected to be in school, we always have some kids who are absent for one reason or the other, they were unable to make that test up until this past fall. Now for Oldham County, that wasn't a huge number. It was only about 36 kids district-wide that turned around this past fall and had to take a makeup. Of those kids, about a third met benchmark. Some scored extremely well, but only about a third made benchmark. So the numbers you're seeing here do not reflect the 36 kids that took it in the fall. This report was put out in July. But I will tell you, because those numbers are so small by school, it really didn't adjust those numbers. If I hand calculated it, it wouldn't be, it might be hundredths of a point off. For example, North Odom High School only had 1 kid that had to take it in the fall. So their scores wouldn't have been impacted at all. The majority of scores fell at Oldham County High School. And I will tell you, of the ones who missed it in the spring, I think 7 of the ones who missed it in the spring still didn't take it in the fall. For whatever reason, we still couldn't get them back in. Our goal is to turn around and test them again in spring. We can do that. And those scores will still count. So if we were unable to get them in the fall, we can still test them again as seniors in the spring.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. So there we are with North Odom High School, looking good, exciting data. Now what I wanted to do though was dig a little deeper into their data and look at how that looked for all their students. North Odom High School is not a very diverse school, as we know. And so their populations of students in these subpopulations, like racial, ethnicity, and poverty, are pretty low, which means they are at risk for being very volatile from year to year. And most of the time, they don't even have enough students where we can statistically give them a score. So really and truly, the only one I could pull out of here to start to look at is African American students. When I look at African American students here, they typically only have 1 or 2 kids. So certainly not enough statistically to make any sort of judgment. But here's what I can say about that. Historically, when they have African American students, they underperform. They typically do not meet benchmark, and they typically have low average ACT scores. So that's just a noticing that I can make statistically. Again, with having fewer than 10 kids in a subgroup, it's going to be hard to do that. However, these kids are going to roll into the district data, which I'm going to show you in a minute, giving us enough students to count, for lack of a better word. But that's sort of the walk away here. Before I leave North Odom High School and ACT, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
I would just like to remind you that North has, I think they're the third or fourth highest ACT in the state of Kentucky also, so it's something to celebrate as well.
Definitely, definitely. To already be high performing and then to continue to increase, it's very impressive. So one of the things that we're going to look at next is Oldham County High School. Unfortunately, when we look at the percent of students meeting benchmark in all 4 content areas, that being English, reading, math, and science, we saw a decline in every single area. Some were significant, some not as significant. What is significant is this. Their 5-year trend data in every area is heading down. Okay, now this, I want to be clear, I'm talking about the percentage of kids meeting benchmark here, not the average ACT score. When I look at their average ACT score, which is represented in the second chart, we can see that their average ACT scores really stay right kind of where they are. They tend to fluctuate a little bit here and there, so that was not drastic. Where their average student performs is consistent. What's happening here is we have less students making the bar over time in all 4 of those areas. Okay? And again, that's a trend downward.
If I'm to read that right, there's about 75 kids in 2019 or 20 that met all 4 benchmarks.
2019 or 20?
375 and 23% of the.
Yes, that is percent. Yeah, that met all 4. Went from 26% having met all 4 to 23. Yes,
Okay.
you did read that correct. So let's look at their achievement gaps. And in this case, their achievement gaps do persist. They are one of the few schools we have that have enough of a population in many areas to count. African Americans stand out for us again here. Okay, in this case, we do have enough to see a pattern. The same pattern we saw with North Odom High School, even though we couldn't statistically call it a pattern, which our African American students tend to underperform on the ACT in all content areas pretty significantly, as well as the percentage of them meeting benchmark in general. Okay? One of the things that you're also going to notice is I took a look at their Hispanic population, and I'm seeing the same kind of thing. They are underperforming when it comes to average ACT and the percent meeting benchmark. And I want to give you an example of that. If we look at, for example, our all students, about 60% of all students met benchmark in English. When I look at African American, only 33% met benchmark, and only 35% of Hispanic students would have met benchmark. So we're talking statistically a pretty significant achievement gap here. Now, I will also share with you, every one of these schools also would have an achievement gap with poverty. That's not something we're pointing out on here because ACT doesn't report that way. However, when we run our own data, we know that poverty, is an issue for us as well. So if you have students who fall into both, African American and impoverished, then the likelihood of their success is drastically reduced. Any questions about Oldham County High School before we go to South Oldham? Okay, when we look at South Oldham High School, we're going to see that 3 out of 4 content areas actually had declines in their percentage of students meeting benchmark. The one that's most concerning to me actually is mathematics, and that is because it's an all-time 5-year low. While it's not much of a dip, it's not heading in the right direction. However, if I look at their average ACT scores, you are going to see just the same thing you saw at Oldham County High School. On average, their ACT scores across the board stay relatively the same. It's just, again, a situation where we have fewer kids making benchmark that we need to take notice of here. Science did drop significantly, but the reason I chose math as the more concerning for me was that science tends to flip-flop back and forth. Right? If I looked at a 5-year trend, it doesn't look the same as a downward trend that I see in math when I look at particularly math over time. And this probably is piggybacks one of the things that Dr. Smith was talking about when he says this math problem we see, it doesn't just go away as they get through middle school and high school. It is something that tends to build with our students, and we struggle with math in most of our subtests. Whereas reading's a little different. We've struggled with it at elementary and making real growth despite the efforts. However, we see by the time that they get to high school, typically they rebound. And so it's able to kind of recoup by then. For some reason, math is not doing that for our students over time. So let's look at their subpopulations. And again, we see the same thing. Their number of students is fairly low. They tend to have a year where they have just enough to count, and then the next year they may have none, for example, in that group. So South Oldham's kind of hard in terms of looking at historical data because it is drastic. But we see the same pattern as we do with North Oldham High School. When they have African American students in a testing grade, they tend to perform lower. So that's something we saw across the board with all three of our high schools. And we saw Hispanics as well. However, I will tell you, the Hispanic average ACT scores are not quite as high as all students, but they're certainly much closer to being average of all students than the African American. But we do see the percentage of students making benchmark with Hispanics being much lower. So again, same kind of issues, a little bit different depending on the school. Any questions about South Oldham High School? I know I'm going fast, so feel free to slow me down.
That's okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's look at Oldham County as a whole. We looked at these schools separately and we saw some pretty drastic things, but if we take all these schools together and look at it from a district perspective, there really is little to no difference. We're basically stable, but this is a good place to be stable as a district in terms of we're stable high. Okay, it's a high-performing district when it comes to ACT. At the bottom here, I included a chart for you to show you what the actual national ACT averages were for composite scores. And you can see, if you look at our average composites at the bottom where it says 1920 in the second chart, and compare them, we beat the nation's average score in every category. Here's what's important to know about that. That national average includes all states and any student who took the ACT. So that could include 12th graders. That could include students who've had it multiple times. It's comparing our juniors, which for many of them, this is their first chance at it, their first bite at the apple, to students all over the nation who may have taken that with different levels of readiness. So that's a really good sign that, again, when you talk about 1.6 million people taking this test, that our average scores outperform those. And I'll dig a little deeper. There are only a handful of states that test all of their students. So when you look at states like Massachusetts, who always ranks really high with average ACT scores, keep in mind they only test about 20%, I think, of their kids. It's their college-bound, high-performing kids. These states over here on the left test all kids. But I'm going to take that even a step further. We test in Kentucky all of our juniors. Some of those states test all their seniors.
Whoa.
So again, we're comparing our Kentucky juniors to students all over the nation. And if we were a state, and I've showed you this data before, if we were a state, we would rank 21st, testing 100% of our kids. Look at the percentage rates of all the ones that beat us, 18%, 11%, 12%. That's outstanding news, that as a district. What obviously is concerning to us is that doesn't represent high success for all of our kids, and so we've got to keep chugging along, but we have to give credit where credit is due. That is an incredible score to have when you look nationally. Of course, you're not surprised for me to tell you where the areas of work are for us with ACT, African American and Hispanic students.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Because obviously we're not changing the curriculum. So what are we going to need to do in order to address that? And these are real deep conversations that I know Dr. Smith will have with those principals, Ms. Pitzenberger will have, and that I have recently had with them myself, to talk about what is out there strategically for us to do to ensure that these kids have the same access, not just opening up courses, but have the same access level of support to be successful moving forward. So that's a good conversation we're having. That includes ACT, so unless there are no questions.
I just have one.
Yes, Mr. Woosley.
Will you, or do you now have the ability to pull out Arvin kids out of the district so that we can look at where their ACT scores are compared to the rest of the kids?
We can.
And then also Kappa when we get to there?
Absolutely, we can.
Okay.
It's not something we've ever done, but we can already do that. So I will get that data for you, and I'll tell you what, I'll filter it through Dr. Smith if that's okay. I'm sure he'd want to know that as well.
I just need it before the site-based meetings.
Oh,
So,
sure,
we're not in
absolutely.
a
We'll
hurry.
get those too. That's a great question. And actually, I think Mr. Watkins would love to know that. So that's a good question.
We probably also need to know where those kids are, school by school,
We can do that.
Leslie, in order for
So
us
the
to
ones that feed to
understand.
Arvin from OC, what is their rate compared? Sure,
Yes.
absolutely. Okay, moving on to another transition readiness area. We're going to start with the academic piece, which is ACT, AP and dual credit. We're going to look at AP now. When we look at AP, we have to remember COVID did potentially have an impact on AP. This hit right before students were released to start having to take their AP test, and it did cause a lot of anxiety for families, students, teachers alike. However, there is good news in terms of its impact. So I will say it absolutely had potential to have a serious impact. I'll show you where it has impact, where it didn't, but the impact seems to have not had any negative connotations to it for the most part, in terms of the COVID. When we look at North Oldham High School, if you look at the chart at the bottom, you can see they increased their percentage of students with a qualifying score. That means a 3, 4, or 5 on their AP exams from a 72% to a 77%. And we say that's a great success, okay? If I show you the trend line, you can see that over time, however, that has gotten worse. However, the jump they made with the 77, if they can just keep that hold, it looks like they've rebounded to what's probably more typical for this school. Really important to know, a 72% pass rate is incredibly high. Obviously, they want to get the highest they can. They've shown they've been able to. Look at the 85%.
Right.
But I will tell you what's happened here.
Right.
As schools increase the access of AP to all students, students who are interested, then we may see some of the pass rates go down because we're testing more students and not just our very highest students. What we then have to do is say that's a great first step, access to everyone. But then our second step has to be, how do we ensure they're successful once they're in it? Just opening the door to them doesn't reduce achievement gaps. We've got to make sure that once they're in there, they get the support they need so that they too can get those passing scores. So there's good news here. I want to also point out that they did have significantly fewer kids enrolled in an AP course. However, when I look at their increase in dual credit, it's almost identical. So I would say for this school, yes, they have fewer kids in AP than they did last year, not over time, but than they did last year. But it looks like the majority of those kids probably chose the dual credit avenue instead of AP. Both get them the same place. It's just whatever one works for them. And so that's kind of what you're seeing there. Any questions?
Well, I just want to make a comment, Ms. McKinney. I'm thinking also, wondering if by opening the doors to AP classes too, I mean, at one point, only juniors and above could take AP classes. That's been several years ago. Then we opened the door to sophomores. We now have freshmen taking AP classes. And I wonder, over the course of their high school experience, that is going to impact how well they do on those ACT tests also.
Well, it's
So
also
we
gonna-
are really getting bang for
You're
our
getting a lot
buck
of
with those
You're
kids.
getting a lot of incidental benefit by having a 9th and 10th grade enrollment, which usually is equally as high as our 11th and 12th graders.
And
That's
you're
a
going to get
great
the equal
point.
bump when you're talking savings on college because if you score the 4 or the 5, you're going to get possible
Correct.
tuition paid for.
Correct. So,
And also, remember, you do not have to take the course to take the test. There are certain tests like statistics and things like that, that if you've got a savvy enough student, maybe didn't take the course, maybe we don't even offer the course, they can sit for the test, and if they pass, that works. And we do have students who do that, who just sit for the test and don't take the course. And those are things that, again, we need to increase our mentorship of, have you thought about taking this test? Because I think you could pass that, right? And so there's always areas for improvement. They're boasting extremely high scores here, as they always have. And something, again, just like with ACT, what we're seeing here with North Oldham High School is they're continuing to push for their all students are continuing to get better, even though they're at high levels. If I look at AP for Oldham County High School, we were a little bit concerned by the percentage of students making benchmark and ACT going down. However, that is not the trend we see with AP with them. They have increased enrollment and a huge increase in the pass rate from 68% to, I believe, 73%. Big numbers.
yeah.
So that's good news for Oldham County High School, is even though maybe ACT wasn't quite where they wanted to be, here's another route to transition readiness in the academic realm, and they certainly took advantage of that. These are their highest scores ever. Their enrollment is way up here for them, and so some exciting things happening with Oldham County High School when it comes to AP.
And I think that the trend at Oldham County High School has been, they were more or less taking dual credit.
Yes.
The majority of their students were, and I do believe their trend has been to increase the number of AP offerings and number of students taking AP classes, so
And you're going to see the increase in both.
we're seeing that, yes.
This is exciting news for Oldham County High School.
Yes.
Okay, if we look at South Oldham High School, one of the things that we're going to see is a pretty significant decline in enrollment. Their percentage of students with a qualifying score is about the same, but we see a lot fewer kids in AP courses here. Now, the first thing you might ask yourself is hope that that means dual credit was up, but it was not true. Their dual credit was significantly down in enrollment as well. So all three of these schools have a different story. However, all three being extremely successful with their pass rate and supporting those kids who enrolled in those courses overall. So again, it doesn't look like the decline in enrollment is due to dual credit. It looks like it just fewer kids took advantage of it. Pass rate still, I want to be clear, really high, at about 68% for them. So when we look at achievement gaps, this is pretty new to us because we tended to not have enough students to even look at achievement gaps with AP because we typically didn't have students in marginalized groups who took advantage of a lot of these advanced placement classes. What we're finding here is exactly that. Students from African American, Hispanic, EL, disability, and poverty backgrounds tend to not take AP classes. When they take AP classes, they tend to not get a qualifying score. What you're going to see over on the, your right side of the chart is the average score of those populations. So while the average score of our all students sits around 3, which is passing, is the average students having passing scores, you're going to see in those other populations that we're naming here, just like with ACT, they tend to underperform. And so the same strategies we're looking for with ACT is the same thing. How do we support these students once we're getting them in the door now? We're encouraging them to take the courses, and now how do we help them see it through so that they're getting those passing scores as well? And so that's all that's there for. It's pretty new data for us because, again, this is really the first year we've looked at it this deeply, but it's something we want to continue to follow as we sort of move forward is, again, when you're good, how you get to great is making sure everybody's good. So that's what we're working on right now. Any questions about AP?
Yes, one.
Mr. Woosley.
So as I'm going through the data, the number of students taking multiple AP courses, it looks like there is a decrease in the number of students who are taking the multiple courses.
That will not tell you. The data you have will not tell you that. That's telling you the number of kids in general enrolled and how many courses are taken. It will not tell you if the number of students, that's a great question, taking multiple AP. I can get you that data, but what you're looking at there will not tell you that.
Okay.
If there's also, but I can look into that. If there's a decrease or an increase in the percentage of students taking multiple courses and how it relates to their pass rate.
Okay.
That was a good question. Okay, dual credit. Just 3 years ago, we almost had nothing to say about this because we just didn't have a whole lot of students taking it. If you remember, South Oldham High School always tended to have the biggest number of students sort of working with this and then followed by OC. But now we're seeing all of our schools step up. I'm going to start with North Oldham High School, and it's so exciting to see that their number of students with qualifying scores has jumped drastically. But what we are seeing here is those students enrolled last year have increased by about 40 students over last year. So they have more kids taking dual credit, and they have more, the number of students with a qualifying score has increased, but when we do that based on percentage, it's almost exactly the same. So they've got, the good news is their qualifying score is the same, but they've got more kids getting it. So that's good news for them. Sorry about that. I tripped up on that one a little bit. So it would appear this is the only area that COVID should not have impacted. What I mean by that, when we talk about students enrolled in a dual credit course, they would have enrolled in that way back in the fall, right? So our number of students enrolled should have been impacted. Now, our pass rate could have been impacted if kids failed as a result of being an NTI in the spring, but it does not appear in any of our schools that happened. They either did better or stayed exactly the same. So that means they had good support through NTI. When we look at Oldham County High School, and that should say Oldham County at the top, not North, and I need to apologize here because we caught these errors, I fixed these errors, and then I turned around and gave you the wrong one. Or no, at the very top, the box, North Oldham High. Sorry. I apologize, that is totally on me. We caught it, fixed it, and I still gave you the wrong copy. Apologize for that. You can see when we talk about Oldham County High School, Look at the difference in their pass rate from 87% to 95%. So not only did they show huge gains in pass rate with AP, they're now showing them also with dual credit. So again, it does not appear that COVID had a negative impact on these students. They did quite well with dual credit. If we look at South Odom High School, same thing, and you can see I just copy and pasted my header, which is why it said north again, my mistake. You can see this is the decrease I was telling you about. They had a decrease in AP students from 17 and a decrease of 32 students in dual credit, but they did go up in their pass rate. So the question we would have for South is let's talk about why we have fewer kids taking advantage of accelerated advanced coursework, whether that be AP or dual credit. And those are conversations that I can tell you that school is having. Good news is across the board with dual credit, we are excited about the results we see. As a district, we went from an 89.8 to a 90% pass rate to 94%. And cha-ching, that means money in the hands of these families as their kids go to college, as they're able to waive those courses that they don't need to take and get credit for them. So big, big, big gain for Oldham County students and families.
Yeah,
Okay,
excellent.
lining it up. Graduation rates.
All right,
Were there questions about dual credit?
all right, let's move on.
Graduation rates, one slide, really easy. We have extremely high graduation rates. One of the areas that our schools are looking at the fluctuation of some of their subpopulations in terms of graduation rate. We often see a much lower graduation rate for disabled students, for example. This is based on federal regulations of graduating with a high school diploma in 4 years. We also calculate, however, students who graduate in 5. The hope would be that our disability population, some of those students just take a little while longer, that number would be significantly higher. While it's in its 80s for a 4-year, it's still in its 80s for 5 years. But I will tell you that it would have been extended to 6, you would have seen a much higher graduation rate. Some of that can be controlled, some of it cannot. It simply is what it is in the group of students you have in front of you. But it's certainly things we want to look into. I want to point out for English language learners, typically across the district, we don't have enough graduating in 1 year. That count, the 80 looks pretty low. I will tell you they had exactly 10 kids, 8 graduated. 2 didn't, so that's where the 80% came from. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind too. Again, looking back at those original numbers I gave you, it's relative to the population and the number you had. So graduation looks strong for us as usual. And then now, I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to ask Mr. Johnson to come up and share with you the latest and the only data we can really report to you right now in terms of EL proficiency as it's reported in the school report card.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney, and welcome, Mr. Johnson.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Please also, good to see you. So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about access results. Access is our annual assessment.
Could you
Alec, you will have to use, you will have to use the
Turn away
mic.
from you, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk to you tonight about the results on Access. Access is our annual assessment of English language proficiency required under state and federal guidance. Basically, it's good news. We, in general, have an attainment rate that I'm pretty happy about, which is students reaching the exit criteria for English proficiency, and we have a pretty good progress rate. The charts that you have that are from the school report card are, they're a little misleading. So while they look great and things are going pretty well, I want to clarify a few things just because I don't think they're particularly clear. So if you were to look, for example, at the first slide, we have elementary interim progress. The numbers on your left, my right, for 2019, that is based on attainment. So this is students in grades 1-12 who got to the 4.5 or higher proficiency level on the assessment at that grade band. The blue for 2020, which shows 53.9%, that's no longer attainment. That's actually students making progress on a projected 5-year span to proficiency. So the state has kind of mixed 2 measurements into one. So what they did, so they took that 2019 attainment rate and said, okay, you're doing great. We want to see, for the remaining students, we want to see all those students who did not attain they said, okay, so where were they? And then they projected out to the 4.5 goal and divided that by 5. So each student has their own individual target each year. And so in the 2020 result of 53.9%, we had 54% of kids reaching that expected 5-year rate of progress, or individual year, 1 out of 5 year. I'm not sure I'm saying that very clearly, and Mr. Woosley, you're looking like maybe I'm not. So do you have a question, sir?
No,
Okay.
keep
Okay.
going, I'm
Speaking
following.
Spanish. No.
It would only get worse, I'm sure.
Is that just in elementary that you're?
No, it applies
Okay.
elementary, middle, and high. If we go to the next slide, here's middle school. So the rate of attainment is lower in 2019 than it was for elementary. And then same for high school, that's the next image. So then you see that to be quite honest, I'm not exactly sure what the state used to determine that green line. They took that starting point that was based on real data, and they have some formula that is not clear to us yet to project out to 2030. And then, so we're above the green
Yes.
line, but we're not exactly sure how the green line was determined. I do understand the blue line, and that's what I just explained. Does anyone have any questions? Overall, I can say that I think we're doing pretty well. Our progress rate is great. I would say that, while those numbers are great that you see represented on the graph, I'm particularly proud because, even much higher numbers of students are making progress. Now it's a matter of making sure that we're making progress at the rate the state expects to meet the 5-year goals.
Mr. Johnson, it might be helpful if if you shared with us what tool is used to measure EL proficiency?
So it's an assessment called Access for ELLs
Yes.
2.0. It's published by WIDA, which is a consortium of about 40 states and the District of Columbia. It's an assessment with 4 domains: listening, reading, speaking, and writing. And then these results here are based on the composite or overall result, which is taking all 4 of those domains and coming up with a composite score. So, and in that composite, listening and reading are weighted more heavily than speaking. Sorry, listening and writing are weighted more heavily than speaking and listening. Did I
Okay.
answer your question?
And so the score is based on a 100?
So the score is not visible to you here in this graph at all.
Right.
So the results the students get, they get a scale score, which is it's a 3-digit number.
And you referred to 4.5 as a
Right,
score.
and then that's converted to a proficiency level. Now, so one of the reasons that you see differences I believe one of the reasons you see such a high attainment number starting out in elementary and a lower attainment number in middle and high school, some of that can be explained because the scale score needed to get to the attainment level gets higher and higher as you go up in the grades. The test gets harder as you go up in grades.
Okay.
So the scale score is then converted to a proficiency level. The proficiency levels are on a scale of 1.0 to 6.0. And Kentucky has decided that 4.5 composite is proficient in English. Some of our neighboring states use a slightly higher threshold. Some of our neighboring states use a slightly lower threshold. So each state determines which proficiency level or proficiency levels are used for exiting ELO. In past years, when I spoke with you, we actually had to get to a certain point on the composite and a certain point on literacy, which was the reading and writing part. So the state has revised that in the last couple of years, and now we're just using the composite.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
You're welcome.
Other questions, board members?
It's kind of fun to have ELL data be the centerpiece of the report card for once.
Yes.
But, we don't get a spotlight on it that often, so it's good to see that. And I
Excellent.
think we're headed in the right direction.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And our last slide for this presentation says, "Thank you for your time." I will repeat what Mr. Johnson just said. Do we have any other questions for this team?
If I could just make a quick statement, because
Please.
I think the data indicates what I've been harping on for the last couple of years, that is our mission statement. When we say that the ensuring the learning of all students, the old term of big data, we've got some really great big data, but we are in the process of constantly drilling down to the subgroups to make sure that every child that goes to Oldham County High School has an equal opportunity, the right chance to be as good as they can possibly be and have a great life. And that is hard work. Leslie has been great for years drilling down on that. Obviously, Alec in his world, we have a new special ed director. We have a lot of people committed to making this a reality, a true thing. It takes a lot of time. It is hard work. But I think that is a tribute to the board with that mission statement, because I'm telling you, I know a lot of superintendents across the state that would trade their body part for the scores that we have. And they're great. But they can be better because, once again, it's about every individual single student.
Yes, yes. Great report. We want to thank this department. Much work went into the aggregating of this data, and we thank you. Let's move forward with our agenda then, board members, and we are ready for the treasurer's report. Superintendent.
Ms. Anderson is in the house. If you'll make your way up to the podium, please.
Good evening, Miss Anderson.
Good evening, everybody. And I echo Leslie's sentiments. Happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you.
Tonight, we have the treasurer's report for the month of November. If we will start on page 38. So we had a beginning balance in our cash of $29,044,000, and we had an ending balance of $71,253,000, almost $254,000. So we had our first property tax check in the month of November. It was $34.4 million for the general fund, and it was $32 million in the prior year. So that is an increase of about $2.4 million.
Wow.
For the other
Good for
cash
us.
activities, you can see food service is up just a little bit, and daycare is down just a little bit. In the next section, on the bonded construction funds, there's very little activity on that. If we turn the page, you can see the cash balances by fund. Just want to note, general fund is up at almost $42 million. It is normally the highest. And then our second one is the building fund, and we use that for our debt service. The other thing I wanted to call to your attention is that the special revenue fund, which is generally negative because we spend the money before we get it back from the state and the feds, is positive at this time, and the primary reasons for that is we've got a new influx of CATS money, and we also have daycare CARES money that is not yet fully spent. If we turn the page to our historical comparisons report, the first line, our general fund revenue, you can see that we are slightly ahead at $54.7 million of where we were last year at $52 million. Again, this is largely a reflection of our property taxes. In the line below, kind of an amazing number here, we have $24,484,000 for both last year and this year in our, and I checked, but after rounding, this is where it comes out. So that is a good sign. In the next section, under general property taxes, you can see from fiscal 20 to fiscal 21, we go from $32 million to $34.4, and that is the $2.4 million that the increase between those two time periods. We are hoping for an additional $1 million each for January and February, and that'll get us very close to our budgeted amount. The PSC property and franchise taxes, again, are continued to be slow, but collections are highest in the spring. Our delinquent property taxes have already exceeded our budget. In the next three, motor vehicle, utilities, and SEEK, they kind of follow a monthly schedule, and we're about 42% through the year. And so if we look at motor vehicle taxes, we are a little bit ahead of budget. Utilities tax, we are a little bit behind budget. And our SEEK program, we are on target. In the next sections, you have building fund revenue and capital outlay fund revenue, and those are all on target as well. On the following page, we have the revenue accounts for each line item. If we look at motor vehicle tax revenue, the 1117 account, you can see that we've got a nice steady increase over the past 4 years. If we look down further at that big number, SEEK in 3111, you can see that we have had a decrease from the prior year, and that's just a function of the state calculations and our property taxes. If you look at the grand total, we go from 52 million last year to 54.7 this year, and that difference is largely because of the property tax increases. All right, now we'll go to the expenses by category. And that's on page 43. As we look at the salaries, you can see 22 million last year and 22.1 million this year, so we're pretty comparable. We've got a very large increase, of course, in our COVID salaries for our VLA. Based on where we're going, we're still trending at $3.1 million, but we have seen some significant decreases over prior year compared to prior year for both certified and classified substitutes, and also in the classified overtime. All right, if we go to page 48, there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you about. Near the bottom, there's an account 065200 interactive flat panel devices, and you may see that there's a budget there of $1.1 million, and we haven't spent very much. That is largely on delay because of NTI. The hope is that we will still be able to get that project off and running. But it is on delay right now because of NTI. On the following page, under property taxes, you can see vehicles, 0732, and in September we got a Ford F-350 for grounds, and this month we got a Ford Transit, $35,000 for maintenance. If we look at the grand total of costs, we've gone from 29.9 to 30.2 million. That's a $254,000 increase, which is really very small, especially considering the costs we've put in for COVID. All right, on page 51 are the expenses by function. No extra comments on that. Following page, we've got the bonding potential. That has not changed. And then on page 55, we have the balance sheets by fund. Nothing interesting this month. And on page 69, we have the income statements by fund. And that concludes the treasurer's report.
Nice job, Ms. Anderson. Are there questions, board members? So motion to approve the treasurer's report made by Mr. Woosley and seconded by Mr. Dodson. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Let's talk about bills and claims, please.
All right, bills and claims are on page 123. And this is a listing of the invoices since we last met. This month we have 733 invoices, and that compares to 1,040 last year. And we have about $2.8 million worth of expenditures going through, which is a $1 million reduction from last year. And then on the following pages are the individual invoices that we have paid with some added descriptions as well. And that concludes bills and claims.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions regarding bills and claims? Motion to approve made by Ms. Hundley, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
thank you.
Thank you. And happy holidays to you. We are ready for approval of one set of regularly scheduled board meeting minutes, and those are from November 23rd, 2020. Any corrections or additions? Motion to approve those minutes. Made by Ms. Hunley, seconded by Mr. Dodson. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Superintendent, we are ready for the notice to the Board of Personnel Actions.
Just one quick typo on the type line. It says, review the following personnel actions since your last regularly scheduled meeting. That should read November. That was just a transfer over there. The report is relatively
Nice
small
catch.
this time of the year, which is always a good thing.
Any comments, board members? All right, thank you, sir. And now we are ready to approve the consent agenda. And we have items A through E. Your recommendation, Superintendent?
Approve all the consent items as presented in the information in your packet.
Motion to approve consent agenda made by Ms. Hunley, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Superintendent, we are ready for recognition, sir.
Well, typically my favorite time of the evening when we get to recognize some students that have done tremendous things. Normally they're here in person. They are not here tonight, but I will announce their names and what we are celebrating them for tonight.
Excellent.
The first is the North Oldham Middle School girls cross country team wins state title. The girls cross country team from North Oldham Middle School competed in the state championships this season and are the state champions. The state championship girls team roster is as follows: Elle Cargold, Audrey Perkins, Riley Alton, Ryan Bergen, Vita Sinzenbrenner, Alexandra Karamziva, Melody Steinecker. Additionally, Ella Cargold won second place in individual time.
Excellent.
The next group to recognize tonight is the North Oldham Middle School boys cross country team. The boys cross country team from North Oldham Middle School competed in the state championships this year and placed second. The state championship boys team roster is as follows: Jasper Smith, Charlie Townsend, Jack Ransdell, Ian Dunlap, Connor Brodsky, Lance Buell, and Colt Hudson. The next group will be the South Oldham Middle School football team, places runner-up in State Middle School Coaches Association Championship. The South Oldham Middle School football team advanced to the state championship and placed runner-up. This is the only second time in the history of the football program that they have made it to the championship. We have seen tremendous growth in this team. Additionally, 2 team members were chosen to represent South Oldham football in Football University and are heading to the national championships in Naples, Florida: Elijah Burns Crump and Deacon King. The state championship team roster is Mason Galloway, Deacon King, Owen Rupp, DeMarcus Jacobs, Xander Searcy, Evan Hickerson, Ethan Arnold, Max Madsen, Luke Hatcher, Gavin Tilhaney, Charlie Hellinger, Caleb Ostertag, Julian Miles, Cole Greenwell, Gunnar Winburn, Joels Davila, Nolan McCormick, Eliza Burns Crump, Adam Kern, Adrian Miles, Davis Larson, Jacob Butler, Shepard Greenfield, Benjamin Osborne, Matthew Osborne, Brady Schatt, Sam Dawson, Parker Ellis, Matthew Panaritos, Blake Dickamore, Josh Stanfield, with team managers Molly Bond and Amaya Woods. That's quite a list of names, and a high five virtually to all of you guys.
Join me in recognizing those outstanding students. Great job with that cast of characters, Superintendent.
I'm now tired.
We are ready for report number 1. Superintendent report number 1, sir.
So long awaited, since
Yes.
June of last year.
Yes.
Superintendent's ILP update. I was just going to type the words COVID and put some standards under it. But you have a lengthy list of information of several standards. Standard 1, strategic leadership, with multiple demonstrators recognized in that. Standard 3 cultural leadership with more demonstrators there, as well as Standard 5 managerial leadership. And last but not least for this report, that would be the Standard 7 influential leadership. So it's there for your review. Many of the items you've seen before. It's just a combination of things to help you as you'll work on the evaluation at the end of the year.
Excellent. Comments, board members? I just want to say, Superintendent, this is an awesome summary of a incredibly challenging year to this point, and we appreciate the efforts you have gone to above and beyond this school year. So
I'll be very happy if it's a very boring report for the second half of the year.
I know you will. Thank you, sir. Superintendent report number 2, sir.
So last month we were meeting, and Mr. Kehoe had asked, I think, a great question, and so we decided to turn this into a super report for a refresher for all board members and new information for our new board members, and this is potential future school sites property report. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bohannon.
Excellent. Welcome, Mr. Bohannon.
Thank you very much. As Superintendent said, the potential future school site report that you have in your packet is intended basically as a refresher course for board members who've been here for some time, and a kind of a crash course for the new board members who may not be as familiar with the properties and how they came to be Oldham County Schools properties. As you can see in the report there that we have, I will start through the list and we'll kind of go through a virtual tour of this. 18 Mile Church Road property is a over 29.5 acre property that was partially donated and partially purchased, 2003, 2005. And Allen Lane property is a 14-acre property donated in 2007. Echo Valley property is 120 total acres that was purchased, portion of it was purchased, and then additional acreage was donated over the course of several years after the initial purchase. I've also listed on the list here is the Liberty Elementary additional property. This does not include the property that the school sits on now, which is about another 7 acres. The Brownsboro campus property, which is a 95-acre property purchased in 2009. And I also included the East Campus property on here. Although we have 2 schools on there, there are adjacent tracts that sum up to 151 acres. And also included in your packet there is the basically deed descriptions, or a little bit of a plot of each of those properties that show the bounding, the meets and bounds of the perimeter as well as adjacent roadways. And Mr. Keel, I don't know if you can see what we're seeing behind me here, but basically we have a map of the from the Kentucky Facilities Inventory Classification List, where we have identified the locations on a map, and basically I can show you exactly where those locations are. Starting with the 18 Mile Church property, this is at 53, out 42, outside of 53, between 18 Mile Church Road and Bluegrass Parkway, and that fronts on 42. The Liberty property, as we know where it is on 42, on Liberty Lane, and as I said, again, adjacent to the existing property. The Allen Lane property is located between Commerce and 146, just on Allen Lane. And you can see the proximity there to the bus garage and the annex. The Brownsboro property, as you can see, is located between 329 Glen Arm Road. It's fronted on the north at 1817, which is Halls Hill. And you can see that property reaches out to 329 in 2 locations, so we actually have road frontage in 4 locations on that property.
And only 1 tree on that property, I can tell by that map.
That's right. Even though it was a nursery at one time.
It's a big tree, though.
It's a big tree.
One big tree. The Echo Valley property is located off of Old LaGrange Road, just south of 71, and it's basically tucked in the Curry's Fork area between Echo Valley Briar Ridge subdivisions, Stone Ridge, and I think that's Lockwood, down there where Barbara Ann Boulevard is. And the adjacency, or the access to that is located at
So it has a tree too.
Timber Ridge Road. And there's also a access easement from Echo Valley. And then the East Oldham property, I'm sorry, yes, the East Oldham property fronts on Moody Lane. And then as you're familiar with where East Oldham Middle School and the Locust Grove property is, but this property actually stretches all the way back to Moody Lane and includes the area that is included in that creek front on that location. And that's a quick virtual tour of them. Are there any questions?
Can you zoom out on
Yes.
that so we can see those all together collectively?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
So you
Bohannon.
can see that the 18-mile church property is pretty much the most remote.
Way out.
And it, I believe this map gives you kind of a good summary of how it's spread out among the district and
Yeah.
for future consideration.
Yeah. Mr. Woosley,
Is it possible for you to share that with me? I know you've got it because I've seen
I
it on
don't
your
have
screen.
that
Okay.
exact, and I would like that image too.
Mine
Well,
just came across as a blue screen.
well, actually, I do have it.
Yeah,
It has
mine's
little
just a,
dots on it.
Look on the first page of the report that was included in there, that might be
Yes.
helpful.
Did not get that?
Yes, we have it.
they do. Mine just was a blue screen when it came in. so I
Oh, I'm
don't-
sorry.
Yeah.
I can get you that in PDF format.
We got it right here, Mr.
I got this image
Bohannon.
memory and a tattoo.
You wouldn't have it probably.
I would like to see that with the roads, et cetera,
And current schools?
and current schools, Mr. Bohannon.
Okay, on the map that you're seeing there, the pinpoints are
Yes.
actual current school locations,
Yes?
with the blue being represented by elementary schools, the orange being representative of middle schools.
Yes.
And the green representative of high schools. And then the red pins represent ancillary buildings and buildings such as Arvin Art Center. And
Excellent. Okay.
and then the administrative and ground shop and stuff like that are located on there as well.
It's a great perspective when we're approving subdivision plans like we did last month to kind of see where they're at in the county.
Yeah. Questions, board members?
I would just like to invite you in the spring when the weather gets better. I know when I first got here, I went on a field trip with Mr. Bohannon and Mr. Ewald. As long as they end up taking you to Cunningham's on the River for lunch afterward, it's a great field trip where you go and you literally drive the county and see the properties. It really gives you, beyond just the map, it gives you a good sense of how big we are and how spread out we are.
Yes, I completely agree, and I have done that too. This was a great review, even for veteran board members, Mr. Bohannon. Great review, and I would also appreciate seeing the properties again.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Kehoe, you good? You with us? Excellent.
Thank you.
So great report.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Bohannon. So on the agenda, we are ready for action item G, sir.
So to speed the process along, unless you just want to see Dr. Smith again, you saw that during the instructional session. I'm not going to have him up to rehash that, but ask for the approval of the 2020-21 Oldham County Schools Comprehensive District Improvement Plan.
Thank you, sir. Any additional questions or comments? We did have an extensive instructional session and greatly appreciate that department sharing with us tonight. Your recommendation, sir?
Approve as presented.
Motion to approve, made by Mr. Dodson, seconded by Ms. Hundley. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Action item H, sir.
So several board members had proposed an additional work session, and so we brainstormed, came up with some dates that are on the handout, starting with January 11th, February 8th, March 15th, April 12th, May 10th, and June 14th, approximately 2 weeks before the regular board meeting. Those meetings will be virtually no action being taken, but where there's instructional sessions, a chance for us to get together, discuss things that we may need to discuss. I think it's a good idea. Looking forward to them. Already have several thoughts in my head for what we can do on these. and just asking that you approve these dates so we can add these calendars or add these to our calendar.
Yes, sir, and we have had opportunity to look at these dates. Any questions or comments? Your recommendation, sir.
Approve the calendar dates for adding additional board meetings.
Motion to approve, please, made by Ms. Hundley, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Action item I, sir.
In your package, you have information pertaining a 17-year-old senior at South Oldham High School, WL, that's requesting early graduation due to hardship.
Yes. Questions or comments? Recommendation?
Approve the recommendation as presented.
Motion to approve, please, made by Mr. Dodson, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Do we have any
It's
public?
Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Board members, as a reminder, please review the two reports at the end of this agenda, the monthly energy usage and the preschool monthly report. Superintendent, we have an agenda item requesting a statement from you, sir.
So I will read this, and I will try to do it without getting a little choked up. Dear board members, it has been a great honor to serve as superintendent of Oldham County Schools for the last 5 years. However, I believe now is the time for me to step aside and let someone else take on the responsibility of leading this great district. I'm retiring after 31 years in the profession on June 30th, 2021. For those that are viewing, I know you don't think I look that old, but it is true. I want to thank the board for their support during the personal and professional challenges I've faced throughout my tenure. That includes my wife facing breast cancer, a kidney transplant, a parent passing away, and all that other good stuff. I've asked staff to work differently at times in order to change outcomes for our students. I want to thank our staff that believed in the vision and worked exceptionally hard to make a difference in the lives of our children. I want to also take this time to thank our families that have been extremely supportive and are a major contributing factor to the success of Oldham County Schools. When the time I spend as superintendent is reflected upon by others, I hope people think I'm leaving OCS a better place than when I started as superintendent. I wish nothing but even greater success for Oldham County Schools in the future, and will do what I can to make the transition for the next superintendent as seamless as possible. Respectfully, Greg Schultz.
Declined.
I guess that about settles that, Superintendent.
That's a mic drop right there. I'm not looking at you.
I'd like to say something.
Well, I'm speechless. Mr. Dodson.
I've talked to Greg about this, and speaking of experience, I know with Greg, it was a hard decision to retire. He's been one of probably the best assets to Oldham County Schools as a superintendent we've had. And I want to support him on this whole endeavor of his, because he's got a bright future as a retiree. And he's not only been a superintendent, but he's been a good friend to the school system and all of us. And Greg and I are still going to football games.
As soon as we can.
And the Arts Center as soon as we can. So Greg, I'm going to congratulate you, but it's kind of bittersweet.
Thank you.
Nice job, Mr. Dodson. I will save my remarks for the June board meeting.
There you go.
Anything else? All right, time to go into executive session, kids. And we need to go into executive session pursuant to KRS 61.810. Hold that thought.
We need to make those motions before we go into executive session.
Oh, we will. Okay.
So we're on the record.
So I'm going to backpedal for just a minute. We are getting ready to go into executive session, but I'm going to ask the board if there is any action which would be in response to the superintendent's announcement.
I will offer a motion. Move that the board declare an opening for the position of superintendent of Oldham County Schools effective July 1st, 2021. Further move that the board authorize the superintendent to immediately initiate the creation of a superintendent search committee pursuant to KRS 160.352, and to negotiate with the Kentucky School Boards Association to provide assistance with the superintendent search process. In order to expedite the process of filling the vacancy, I move that the board direct the superintendent to appoint an administrative staff member who will not be a candidate for the position to assist the screening committee and the board with the activities and the coordination of the superintendent selection process.
Yes, and I thought we were going to do that when we came out of executive session, but we apparently needed to back up to do this. So I appreciate that, Mr. Woosley. We hear your motions. Is there a second to the motion? Motion second was Mr. Dodson. All those in favor? With great reluctance. Mr. Woosley, would you take us into executive session, please?
This time I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss the following matters: 2 litigation matters pertaining to student injuries, 1 litigation matter pertaining to a non-student injury, and 1 special education matter. The board needs to go into executive session pursuant to KRS 61.8101C to discuss litigation preparation under the public disclosure of which would jeopardize the board's position.
Yes, so I need a motion to go into executive session, made by Ms. Hundley, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. Thanks, everybody. Cut.
See what you've gone and done?